Alright, response video. Yep, it's recording. It's a Hythloday guy. So he did post, we had had a conversation, a Skype conversation, and he had said he had made an hour video, hour and a half, whatever, taking notes, and he wasn't going to post that, and but I guess he thought I was going to record the Skype, the first conversation, but he never scheduled it. He just said, you know, he just called me out of nowhere, and, you know, I wasn't ready to record anything. And I don't think it would have been a very good recording anyway, because we spent most of the time beating to death this reference to somehow it's a utilitarian obligation to have children in defense of your philosophy. And so anyway, well, we have talked over it and through it and past it a million times, and so we've come to some basic agreements that it would be wrong to imply that the philosophy would die out otherwise, as Thunderfoot did, because obviously the people who exist now are anti-natalists, were not produced by anti-natalists. Their parents were not anti-natalists, at least not at the point where they had children. So you don't need anti-natalists to breed you to become an anti-natalist, so the philosophy won't die out necessarily, as Thunderfoot was saying. So that was cleared up. And it was cleared up beyond that, this utilitarian obligation that somehow creating soldiers for the war would be a good idea. Well, you know, you can negate on a couple of grounds. A minor one, but a real one, is the fact that you could probably do more effective persuasion with the money it would take to raise a child. So if you just consider how much money you have to waste in terms of making your own soldier, it would be a lot more practical to use that money to spread the idea to other minds, and you'd get more conversion for your buck, so to speak. I'd argue another argument is that it's not a certain utilitarian obligation, because it's not certain that having kids will solve the problem. You might still lose the battle, and if you lose the battle, then your extra soldiers just make you a utilitarian loser, because now you just created more suffering with no benefit. So on the utilitarian grounds, you completely failed. So until you have a certainty that having my own personal army, my own creation, is going to get me victory, it would still not be a utilitarian obligation. Now let's say I knew for certain that my kids were going to be critical to the cause, then I guess I would concede that, yes, in the utilitarian interest, I'd probably have kids. I mean, I'd pay attention to that logic. I would argue that I would still have some sort of personal right of offensiveness. That utilitarianism doesn't mean that you're not a human being. That you would still find it difficult and perhaps impossible to do what you're required to do. For example, if I was required to rape one woman to prevent 10 rapes, maybe I just couldn't do it. You know, just as a human being, I couldn't violate my own character, even though I knew it was the right thing to do. I just couldn't do it. And I might have that apprehension about having kids, just that it would drive me insane. I'd have to kill myself. There's just no way I could do it. So anyway, I think that's resolved. So we can put that one away and say, yes, having kids does not solve the problem, and there's more bang for the buck in converting other people's kids than, you know, raising my own soldiers. So anyway, I mean, I just don't like this idea of, like, I don't mind being called a utilitarian or a negative utilitarian, but this idea that it has to be a philosophy that covers every single circumstance or it fails somehow logically, I just think it's bullshit. I think there are circumstances, like categories, that don't belong in their own category, and you know, so these technical, you know, these people that play this logic like it has to have some sort of mathematical perfection, I think it's just bullshit. And math doesn't even have that perfection. I would argue that there's probably lots of perfectly valid formulas that crash when you go below a certain point. So I think it's just silly to place this obligation, that every, well, like I said, if we had certainty, I guess I would say that I'll give you logical perfection in behavior. But in an atmosphere of uncertainty, you have to measure possibilities and probabilities, and those are a lot harder to justify or explain or quantify. What is a 10% chance of, running a kid over on the street? How much does that weigh? How much does that inhibit your behavior? Those are really complex questions, and they're just not going to be covered by some blanket philosophy. We have to get into probabilities based on the fact that we can't know for certain what an outcome is going to be for a specific instance. Obviously, for general activities, we know for certain that people will die, that this year's people will be killed by drunk drivers. We know for certain that's going to happen. Anyway, so having disposed with that, there was a point in the video where he did, I was griping about the evasions that people use, what's the word I used? The way they cheat the argument to escape. And one of the most obvious cheats, in my opinion, is the, I didn't have a person argument. The person doesn't exist yet, so I couldn't have imposed on them. I think it's just such a silly evasion. We know the consequence. If you plant an oak tree, a seed, an acorn in your front yard, and you have only a 10-foot front yard, and it can only accommodate a 5-foot high tree, it's not going to work. It's going to grow into an oak tree. You don't think it's going to be a salamander or that it's going to be a piece of paper. It's going to be an oak tree. And when you have a kid that you're having a person, you're having an adult, and you're eventually going to have an aged person who's going to die. You're going to have a whole thing. And on top of that, that thing might reproduce itself and have things. And all those things are an implication of your action. And that. That isn't hard to figure out. And so that's just a silly, juvenile, it's a preposterous evasion to say you didn't impose because you didn't really do anything but plant a seed. You didn't make a tree. You made the tree by planting the seed. Everybody knows it. And it's just a silly evasion when people pull that shit. That they didn't impose on a person. Now, the person happens. Okay, we know what kids grow into. So it's not a reasonable evasion. It's an unreasonable, cheap evasion. So that's an example of an evasion. He mentioned briefly, well, I'll get to that on the way back, I guess. It's cold out here. Yeah, my hands is cold. Anyway, should have wore gloves and probably another coat. But anyway, too bad. Until the trip homeward. I hit the button. Well, that's fairly bogus. Yeah, I don't know. What's the rest of that video on here? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I hit the proper buttons and such. So anyway, sorry, I'm having technical issues. Yeah, never mind. So anyway, I was talking about the asymmetry. It should be on there. And I was just pointing out how it's not a bad when you prevent a good. Okay, an unnecessary good being prevented is not a bad. Not winning the lottery is not a bad. No Martians eating ice cream, going yum yum, happy happy is not a bad. But, okay, yeah, preventing a bad, an unnecessary bad thing from happening, a suffering, a negative feeling, is a good. So preventing an unnecessary bad is a certain good, but preventing an unnecessary good is not a certain bad. And that's where you can sort of see it most clearly. It's most visible as a lopsided equation, a lopsided fact, that the value of the good isn't as strong as the value of the bad. And therefore asymmetry, therefore lopsided scales, therefore, that's why this thing doesn't work. The other way I think to illustrate it is just to argue, as I often argue, is that most goods, or if not all goods, are merely what you get when you eliminate a negative state, when you elevate from a more negative to a less negative state. That's what we call a good. So you're really undoing negatives to create positives. So you must first have a negative before you can create a positive. You must first need to gain anything. There's no gain without first creating the need for it. And therefore, you have another lopsided circumstance, because obviously in the absence of the creation of that need, there is no need. Need evaporates once you eliminate the thing needing it. We create the only need that exists for us to exist. There is no need for us to exist outside of our own perception of a need that we exist. And that is, just inescapable, rock solid, hard logic. That you can describe a circumstance needing rescue. I've used the rescue metaphor, but it's a good one. Where there's something needs to be fixed, or something will be harmed. That circumstance has an urgency, where the circumstance of something not needing, an elevation in circumstance that isn't out of need for an elevation, whatever that would be theoretically, a good derived, going from comfortable to double comfortable, requires no red lights, no emergency, no urgency, no anything, and is, in all practicality, probably a ludicrous non-existence of a circumstance. So the asymmetry is basically based on the idea that we create attachment and addiction, and it's an expression of that addiction that compels us to say something must be, or something must change, and it's not intrinsic. How you doing? There's no fundamental argument here about where logic points. It's just about where people's perceived they want something, and it's want is not need, and want fulfilled is not necessarily, if the want has some kind of capacity to generate more need or more want, isn't a good thing. If you're satisfying a want by creating more want, you haven't gained anything, you've lost something. I guess there's probably better ways to say it, of course, always is. But I'm just saying there's no counter rational argument to the factual difference that rescuing somebody from harm and giving somebody a extra special wonderful gift are two different agendas, and the one agenda has times the speed of light squared, more character, more value weight than the other. So enough, I think, to be said. And we'll play the rest of the video and add whatever needs to be added and such. Heading to the leafy area anyway. Just, I don't know, a lot of stress. Yeah, stress everywhere. Everywhere I go, something's broken. And it's broken in stupid ways, and causing me to have to think of some kind of innovative solution, which requires my brain to work, my physical body to work, and I don't want to do either one. Anyway, till next time and such.